We good? Awesome. So we're going to talk about the lower back, how to live an active life with a healthy lower back. And really the goal here today is to give you some tips, tricks, exercises, but ideas of not only how to maintain spinal health in your lower back, but why it's so important and how it can interact and affect every part of your life. And I really, when it comes to lower back health and just back health in general, a lot of times we don't think about how important it is until it's in crisis. And so my goal here is to give you things that help not only prevent those crises from occurring, but make you more resilient in later years. Because it's one thing if we can live to 75, 100, or whatever, 100 centenarians, but if we don't have quality to those years, what's the point, right? If I can't do the things that I still love to do, you know, if I'm not myself anymore, if I can't hike with my husband or go for walks or whatever, it's one thing to live those years, but not to have that quality. So that's really my goal, is to instill some education with you, and then you hopefully can share it with people that you love, because a lot of people don't understand just how important their spine is, and that's my mission in life, is to make sure that people realize that. So that being said, the lower back or lower back pain in particular is extremely common, especially in this country. 80% of the population actually globally will experience back pain in their lower back, and it's a leading cause of disability in the workplace. It's increased in terms of instances and cause of disability from 1990 to 2015 by 54%. And it costs us annually about $50 billion, and it's going to raise to over $100 billion when you include like the fact that people are less productive, they take time off of work because of pain, et cetera, et cetera. So why? Why do you think it's so common? Why has it raised from 1990 to 2015? What is happening in our population that's affecting our spines and our lower backs more than ever before? Stress, fatter, yep, all those. Obesity is a huge one, more weight on the spine, stress on the spine, yep. Anything else? Technology. So as a result of technology, what are we doing more than ever before? We're sitting. We sit. The average American sits. Do you have any idea how many hours per day the average American sits?
10 or 12.
Yeah, it's the range is between 10 to 13 hours a day. That's a lot of time sitting. And it didn't used to be that way. We used to be very, very active. We had to walk everywhere. And it's interesting because if you look at populations where they still do that, so for example, mentioning centenarians at the beginning of this talk, but there's areas of the population where we've been able to study people who live over 100 years old. They're called blue zones. I don't know if you've heard of them. But one of the key components of those areas is they have extremely active lifestyles. They walk everywhere. It's not that they're running marathons. They're not training CrossFit. What they're doing is they walk to church. They walk to the grocery store. They walk to their neighbors. They're constantly moving. And we now are more sedative than we've ever been before. And the beautiful thing about our spine and our body is it was designed to move. We were made to have range of motion. And if we are in one position at one time, sitting, or actually any position, what happens is you're statically loading the joints. A joint, from your fingers to your knees to your toes, why is a joint there? It's there for motion. And when we're in one position and we're not moving, we're loading that joint. And if it's left like that, that added load, it's the same thing when you have, too much load. Maybe it snowed a lot and you have a flat roof, right? And you have too much snow on your roof. What happens? The roof ends up caving in. Well, the same thing happens with our joints. If we're loading them too much for too long, they start to break down earlier than they were designed to. The reason this is so detrimental in particular when it comes to our spine is because in our spine, that is where our nerves originate from, our nerve roots, which are extensions of our brain. And it's basically the master control system that controls every other part of our body. And that has to go through this highway in our spine. and it extends out at each level in our spine. And so if we start to compress those joints, then those nerves start to get compressed, and only 10% of your nerves perceive pain. But if you have enough compression on that nerve and eventually the pain starts to be sensated, that's where you get that sensation of, oh, I put my back out, right? Maybe you just lift wrong and you go, oh, I put my back out. But most likely that nerve was already irritated, and it's like a loaded gun, and it just takes a little bit of, and you put enough pressure on that nerve, that sensation for pain comes into play, and then you have the, oh, I put my back out. So it's really this static load that's a detriment to our overall joint health. Whether it's our lower back, our shoulders, our hips, our knees, our toes, all of them were made to move, and they were made to move in full ranges of motion. But what happens is we stay in this one position like this. We round forward, we're on a computer, right? And so it's putting all this extra load on these joints, and then, you do this at work, then you go home, you've had a long day, you get in the lazy boy, and then it's so comfortable you don't even have to get up. And you stay in that position for hours, and then eventually you're like, ooh, I should move, I gotta go get food, right? And then you start to come up and you're like, ooh, oh, right? Because you've just been stuck in that position, okay? So the other thing too I didn't mention is the lumbar spine, or the lower back, is more susceptible to pain and issues because it is not as well protected as other areas of our spine. So if you think like our mid-back, you have your rib cage that supports it. Your lower back, the only thing that surrounds it is soft tissue. Hopefully some muscle, your core. Hopefully that's stable. But other than that, there's some fat, there's visceral, your organs, right? It's not very stabilized compared to like your mid-back. And then your neck has a lot less weight added on it versus your lower back has the weight of your head, your mid-back. Everything's on top of this 5 joints. And if you don't have strong muscles or strong core to help support them, then they're going to be more susceptible to irritation, specifically when we do any type of rotation, which is a lot of times when I hear people say, oh, I put my back out, it's usually some sort of bend and rotation, because that's the weakest part of the lower back or the lumbar spine, especially if you don't have good muscle strength. So we're going to talk about that when it comes to recommendations and what we can do. So this is a pretty interesting chart because I know I talked about static load. So when we're in certain positions, this chart shows us in each position what adds the most amount of pressure or compression to the discs of the lower back, or those spacers in between each of our joints. So when we're laying on our back, it has the least amount of pressure on our disc. This is why when we're sleeping, the best sleeping position is on our back. Now, the next least position is when we're on our side, which is the second best option in terms of sleeping for your spinal health. And then third, standing. Now, if you're standing and you add a little bit of bend, that increases the load because your center of mass is coming away from your lower back. So that's based on physics, is adding more pressure to that part of your spine. So the more forward I bend, the more load I'm putting on my lower back. This is why, depending on your hobbies, like my mom loves to garden, and whenever I see her in the garden, this is what she's doing. And it drives me nuts. And I'm like, Mom, because I know she's increasing the load on her spine when she does that. So she's going to be more susceptible to hurt herself or injure it, especially if she doesn't have a lot of strength around her core. So ideally, if you're gardening, you want to kind of squat down, use a bucket, or use some sort of chair, something to sit on, so you're lowering your center of mass, so you're not going so far forward and putting as much load on those discs. Okay? Now, sitting, if we're in proper posture, is actually less than that bending over position. But if you start to flex forward, that's where you're going to increase the load. So really sitting with poor posture is probably the worst thing that we can do for our spine. Has anyone ever been to like Asia or even like the Middle East, India? No. what you'll notice, especially if you go into people's households, what do they lack? Chairs, because they don't sit in chairs. They either sit on the floor or they squat. Like you see people like cooking. This is how they cook, around like a fire. Yeah, right? Now, have you ever watched a baby? What are they doing when they're playing? A 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, they're squatting. They're always, that's a normal rest position for a baby and also an adult. But what happens is we start to sit at a young age, and then we never stop sitting, and we start to lose that mobility in through our spine, in through our hips, in through our ankles. And now you have most adults, if you ask them to get into a deep squat and hold it, they either have to like come up on their toes or they fall forward on their back. They can't do it. We've lost our ability to deep squat. So that's why one of my recommendations for how to have a healthy lower back is to work on not only better posture, but improving your overall range of motion, not just in your lower back, but in your hips, in your knees, in your ankles, because everything's connected. And if I have stiffness in my feet and my ankles, what happens when I walk is my ankles can't absorb force because they're so stiff. So where does that force travel? To the knee, to the hip, to the lower back. Same thing with my knee. If my knee is twisted, if it's not functioning the way that it's supposed to, it's not going to absorb force. Where does it go? To my hips, to my lower back, to my mid back. It all is connected. So I know this class is obviously about the lower back, but my challenge for everyone is to really, when you're thinking about your health, we can't just look at it in little pieces and little parts because everything's connected, okay? Now, when we sit for long periods of time, what happens is we tend to get tension in through the front of our hips. These are your hip flexors. They tend to pull forward, and we tend to have kind of like this open scissors stance. And this is something you kind of see with pregnant women as well, because they're carrying a whole human and the weight being added here. The reason that this is significant is because when we do this, it means that our core isn't strong. We've lost strength into our core. So one of the best things we can do to support our lower back is to build up core strength. Now, your core isn't just the front six-pack washboard abs. It's not that. It's actually a cylinder that wraps around, and there's a top and there's a bottom. The bottom is your pelvic floor, and the top is your diaphragm, which is the muscle that you use to breathe, okay? Now, the core needs to be stable not just in the front, but in the sides and in through the back. And when you have stability in through that core, that takes pressure off the lumbar spine. So that's going to mean that's more supported. So that's why, you can lift, like you've probably seen people do deadlifts or, weight-bearing exercises where they bend forward, but you can't do that if you don't have good strength. So that's why weightlifters, if they do injure themselves, it's typically because they're not stabilizing their core, and that's what adds too much pressure to the discs in their spine, and then they hurt themselves. And that's also partially why if you see people lifting, they put those belts on. Those belts are there to kind of engage that core, and especially if they're doing massive amounts of weight, it is basically mimicking the core for them. So they don't have to have as strong of a core to lift 500 pounds because they have that belt to stabilize them. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we're going to get to some exercises, and I'll give you some examples of good core exercises to do. Proper lifting, we kind of talked about that with the gardening. Other things to do is, move more, sit less, decrease inflammation, which we'll talk about in another slide, and making sure you're getting enough sleep and hydration. Our joints, in between each of our joints, they have fluid, and the fluid mostly is water. We need to make sure that we're remaining hydrated, because if we don't, that's going to affect our joint's ability to absorb that force. The more hydrated the joint is, the more resilient it's going to be to those stressors acting upon it. So especially this time of year when we have so much heat and humidity, it's more important than ever to make sure you're drinking enough water, but not just water, you need to be having electrolytes, which if you don't know what those are, they're minerals in the water that help with your hydration levels. So magnesium, potassium, sodium. So you want a good balance of that in your water because that's going to help you actually hydrate your body. Because if it's just water, you're not going to necessarily get enough hydration. So that's just a big tip, especially this time of year. And of course, I'm a chiropractor, so we'll talk about chiropractic care because that's, in my opinion, one of the best things you can do for your spinal health. Now, all right, exercises. So we talked about how the hip flexor gets tight. This is the muscle in the front. It attaches to your lower back, and it comes around, wraps down, and attaches into the front of the hip. This muscle's major job is hip flexion. Bring that hip up. The other important muscles to think about is our glutes. These are massive muscles, and they're so important for our overall spinal health, and not only just that, but gait, motion, our ability to absorb force. And when we sit, what happens to our glutes? They get really, really weak because we never use them. So we want to focus on stretching what's tight, which is the hip flexors, and then we want to focus on strengthening what's weak. A lot of times people think, oh, I just need to do more stretching. I just need to do more stretching. It's not necessarily that you need to stretch more. There's probably some areas where you have some weaknesses that you need to strengthen. So it's really a balance of both. So some exercises that I'm going to give you are the core ones first. This floor looks clean. So do we have a mat?
Do you want a mat?
Yeah, that'd be great if you have a mat. It doesn't look dirty, but when we're doing core, I'll talk about this briefly. There's things that you want to avoid. Anything where you're doing a lot of twisting, so like those Russian twists, side to side bends. Like I said, that's the weakest position for your lower back. It doesn't mean that you can't build up to that at some point, but a lot of times we don't have enough stability in that position, so just avoid it. The other one is the leg raises, V-ups, and Russian twists. Again, we talked about kind of the positions that add the most amount of pressure to our lower back. It's when we're sitting and we're flexed forward. And when you're doing specifically sit-ups, what are you doing? You're sitting up and flexing forward. So that's adding more load to the lower back. And then leg raises, typically a lot of times when you do leg raises, a lot of people will feel a lot of pressure in the front of their hips. Why? It's because they're not actually engaging their core. They're compensating with their hip flexors. So they're actually using more hip instead of core. So my favorite exercises are these three. The bird dog. So this is the one where you are on all fours. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to lift opposite leg and opposite arm. So I'm going to kick this leg back, lift this arm up like this, and I'm going to hold stability in my core. So if you were to come and poke me, if you poke me in the side, you poke me in the front, you poke me in the back, everything is tight because I'm engaging the whole cylinder. And I should actually be able to hold this position and breathe at the same time. Why? Because that diaphragm, like I said, is part of your core. And it's supposed to be able to hold stability and still function at the same time. So you want to be able to hold it for about 5 seconds, take a breath, and then come back, reset, other side. Now, if you go into this position and you're like wobbling like this, you want to reset. Because we don't want to train that core on unstable foundation. We want to reset and find that stability point and then come back. If you lose it, at 2 seconds, come back, reset, and do it again. Okay? Now, I would do 10 reps on each side. Hold for 5 seconds. And you can also do it on the reverse, which is the dead bug. So this one can be a little easier, especially if you have issues with your knees. So you lay on your back. Now, most people, when they lay on your back, you'll notice there's a gap between their spine and the mat. We don't want that. We want to tuck the pelvis under like this. And then if you were to come and poke me, you should feel engagement in my core. My legs come up 90 degrees, arms are up, and then I slowly lower, keeping that spine flat on the floor. Slowly lower, spine flat on the floor. Okay, again, 5 seconds, hold, be able to breathe. Okay?
Does your foot go down to the floor or no?
No, you don't, I mean, you can, but no, I would keep it up. Yeah. But yeah, if you, and you can keep your knees bent, that'll make it a little easier too. So there's different ways. I mean, working up to it, you can go on. If you do the bird dog, you'd be on all four, like you'd be on your toes, like this, doing it, instead of on your knees, but you know, we don't have to get to the Olympics, just take it slow. Now, I didn't mention, it's not on here, but this is a pretty simple one. As we were setting up for the dead bug, the pelvic tilt exercise, which is just simply this tilt and hold. This is a great starting core stability exercise. It seems really easy, but even right now, the fact that I'm tucking and holding my core, so I have to use my lungs, I'm breathing, this is a great workout. So it's working on, like we said, that pelvis tilting forward, because our hip flexors get tight, we're tilting it back and we're holding. And we can add to this by simply adding a little bit of march. And when you do this, you shouldn't feel your hip flexors engaged, because all that motion is coming from that stable foundation, that stable core. So you just whoop. If you feel yourself like lose it, see how, like this, that means you're not engaging that core. Make sense? Okay. Now, my other.
You can do those standing up too.
Yes, you can do.
Oh, I have a back injury.
Yes, you can do those. And that's a great, like, I always like to think about it with the pelvic tilt exercise. You think about your pelvis like it's a bowl, and it's filled with water. If the bowl is too far forward, water spills out the front. If the bowl is too far back, it spills out the back. So it's really about thinking about that neutral pelvic position, and then going into that. So you can do it, like Ira said, in that standing position as well, okay? Planks, side planks, front-facing planks, again, those are great exercises. You can do them on your knees too, but the side ones are great for working on that, the side of the cylinder, engaging this transverse abdominis muscle, okay? Now, on here too, the exercises for the lower back, kind of going back to this, I talked about strengthening the glutes and stretching the hip flexors. So my favorite hip flexor stretch, one knee back, one knee forward, and we're gonna tuck the pelvis under like this, and you're gonna feel that stretch in the front of the hip. It's not runner's lunge like that. We really wanna focus on tucking that pelvis, because then you're gonna engage that hip flexor. That's my favorite hip flexor stretch. And do that on both sides. And then to strengthen the glutes, we're gonna do glute bridges. So feet under my knees, engage those glutes and lift that pelvis up. And that's gonna help strengthen those glutes. The other one is the clamshells, which are on your side. This is to strengthen your glute med, which is your hip rotator. You're gonna have your legs stacked. You're gonna keep your ankles together, and you're gonna bring that knee up with your ankles still together and rotate through here. That's gonna engage this muscle. And again, you do it on both sides. So strengthen the glutes and stretch the hips. Any questions on the exercises? No? Good, makes sense. And proper lifting, always bend with the knees, avoid twisting. Good. In terms of the inflammation aspect, so a lot of the issues that we see with lower back in particular is sometimes we can have acute inflammation, which is when you just injure it. Like you say you sprain your ankle and you're gonna see it swell. That's inflammation going to the injury site. It's not a bad thing, right? It's a smart mechanism that our body has in place to help that joint heal. That inflammation is actually white blood cells, good cells coming to the injury site to help it repair. What becomes a problem is when we have acute inflammation that never leaves, and it becomes chronic in nature. And this is when we have people who have chronic low back pain, or pain that's always there, but if you go to the tissue site, it doesn't actually have the same heat markers of acute inflammation. What it has is just these chronic inflammation markers. So what that means is there's lots of different things that we can be doing that can cause this increase in inflammation in our body. And a lot of times if we have inflammation throughout our body, we're going to have a lot more pain, okay? Because it signals the pain sensation. Why? Because it's telling your brain, oh, be careful, this is injured, don't hurt it, right? So you sprain your ankle, it feels pain. Why? So you don't step on it and make the injury worse, right? The problem becomes when it's chronic and you feel pain everywhere and then you can't do anything, even though it's actually, you don't have any injuries, there's no actual tears, but you still have all this pain, okay? So what are some of the things that you can do if you have chronic inflammation? Supplements, some of the best supplements: turmeric, ginger, omega-3s, spirulina, sleep. Sleep is so important for inflammation and repair. It's when we get into deep sleep, that's when our growth hormone is produced, which is our hormone necessary for tissue repair. And then when you're in deep sleep, it's also when our lymphatic system is activated, which actually cleans up the inflammation in the brain, particularly beta amyloid plaques, which are associated with what disease? Alzheimer's disease. So again, sleep is so important. And I know we have a whole class that we talk about improving sleep quality. Fasting can help with chronic inflammation. The reason being is because a lot of times chronic inflammation can start in the gut. Why? Because if we're ingesting food that's inflammatory, or if we're ingesting food that contains toxins, we have a cell layer to prevent the food or the toxins from entering our bloodstream. But what can happen is that cell layer can become permeable. And so these toxins can start to enter our bloodstream, which causes inflammation because our body sees these toxins and it's like, ooh, must attack, foreign invader. But what happens is if it's constantly, it creates an inflammatory response, but if it's constantly doing that, then your body's never going to get a chance to heal, okay? So that's where our diet is huge, making sure we're not eating a lot of refined carbs, sugars. Gluten is another thing that can actually cause permeability to the gut, so things to be aware of. And then fasting is a great way to heal the gut. When you do extended day fasting at hour 24 of not eating food, that is when your body starts to produce stem cells in the gut lining. So I actually have a patient, she has Crohn's disease, and she hasn't had an attack in years, and she testifies it to not only her chiropractic care is a big one, but she also does extended day fasting once every 3 months.
That means you don't eat for 24 hours.
Yeah. So like, for example, no, I mean, your body gets used to it. I have a whole class on fasting too, because people are like, fasting,
So
what?
what's intermittent?
Intermittent fasting is different. Instead of going 24 plus hours, intermittent means it's daily. You have an eating window, so you limit when you're eating during the day. So it's usually 16 hours of not eating and then 8 hours of eating. So say you have your last meal at 8 p.m., your next meal wouldn't be until 8 a.m. Oh, no, 12 p.m. So you wouldn't eat breakfast.
So you do 16 hours of not eating.
Yes, 16 hours. You can start at 12. The research is like, I think one of the research studies that I use a lot is 12 hours of not eating reduced breast cancer risk in women by 50%, just of 12 hours of intermittent fasting. And
But
yes.
you can't really do that if you have low blood sugar.
So yes, it is.
You can't do that.
Yeah, it depends on you have type 1 or type 2, because actually they've done studies with type 2 diabetes and it actually helps with blood sugar, but you have to work really closely with your doctor just to make sure that you're monitoring. Yeah.
Right,
Yep.
I'm not diabetic, but every once in a while my
Blood sugar gets
I
low.
have to have something every 2 hours.
Yeah, so you have to, so what happens is our body gets really used to using sugar for fuel, and that if you don't have a lot of fat, the whole switch when we fast is we're switching from using sugar for fuel to using fat for fuel. So we have to become fat adapted and using those fat cells to start to, because basically all of your fat is sugar molecules bound together, and we have to release those in order to, and it creates ketones, and that's what we need to use for energy. So you can survive. It takes about 40 days before you actually starve from not eating food. But we live in a world where we're constantly have sugar all the time, so our body doesn't know how to get into that fat adapted state, and so it becomes, your blood sugar just drops, and your body doesn't know how to get into those fat stores to then, so that's why it can take some time, and it's good to monitor, because some people are a little different. Like I work, me and Dr. Jillian, who used to own Awakening, she opened a second office up in Plymouth, but we did a fast last week for 50 hours. And she was monitoring her blood sugar, and her blood sugar got really low, so she had to have like a little bit of avocado or something to keep her blood sugar stabilized so it didn't drop too low. Versus like me, my blood sugar is fine. But I have a lot more, she's a lot thinner and doesn't have as much fat to use for fuel, and I have more. So it just worked out. But yeah, fasting, I could keep talking about it for hours because it is a lot of information, and there's a lot of different nuances of it. Women, I'll just put this, women have to be more careful when it comes to fasting because of our hormones, because you do need carbohydrates for your hormone health. Men, go crazy. You do great. Men who start fasting, they just, like Michael, he's fasts 22 hours a day, and he's been doing that for years, and he lost over like 50 pounds, looks great, has no joint pain, like just feels like $1 million. Yeah, men think about it and it happens. Yeah, women, we have some beautiful things that we have to work on, which is our hormones. But it makes us powerful. So, I digress. All right, now, this is a real patient. She had back surgery in 2014, so she had her disc removed in 2014, which then led her to needing SI joint fusion, lower back fusion. And then she's been in, ever since, just chronic pain in her lower back, 9 out of 10, worse pain than she had prior to her surgeries, constant, over 2 years. And it was really sad because she had never seen a chiropractor before. And by the time she came in to see us, this is what her spine looked like. And she did improve greatly with her chiropractic care, but there was a limitation of what we can do. And the reason that I show people this image is never to scare them, but to help people understand that if we can be more proactive instead of waiting and having this become a reality. Like I think the statistic is, it's on the next page, if your first point of contact after back pain is you go through an orthopedic, your chance of having surgery is 42%. Versus if you see a chiropractor first, your chance of having surgery is 1.5%, right? Not that, sometimes surgery may be necessary, but if it can be avoided, like how much better off would you be later in life? Because what happens when you fuse those joints together, there is no motion at all. So it starts to, you saw her, she had one surgery, then the next surgery, then the next surgery. And that's what I see time and time again, is you get one surgery, then you need a next surgery, because now, as a result of the one surgery, the bones above it start to break down. So then you need a second surgery. And then above it, bones start to break down. So you need a third surgery. So it just becomes like this cascade of events. And whether people choose chiropractic care or not, completely up to them. But when someone comes in, they're just like, oh, I just didn't know. Like I never knew I should get my spine checked. But I always equate it to, if your foundation is off in your house, of course it's going to start to break down or start to crumble. The same thing's true with your spine. If you're walking around with a spine like this, yeah, it's going to start to break down. You can't absorb force. You can't move through life the same way you would if you had a perfectly straight spine. Life is stressful, as Iris said, so we have things constantly weighing on us, whether it's motor vehicle accidents, slips, falls, stress from family, sleeping stress, work stress, whatever it is. And when that compounds on our spine over years and years, you lose that resiliency. And sitting posture, poor posture, standing too, sleeping posture, all of this adds weight to your spine. And like I said, your spine, it's the center of everything. It's the center of your motion, it's the center of your nervous system. You cannot have a healthy you without a healthy spine. And I have been under chiropractic care since I was a baby. I have never once had back pain, but I still get adjusted. And it's not because I have pain, it's because I don't ever want to have pain. And I want to be able to do the things I love for years and years and years and years. Because if we can prevent issues from happening instead of reacting to them once they do, how much better would our lives be? Because we live in a world where we're constantly in crisis mode. We wait for the symptom and then we fix it. And my motivation is to help people realize that the best doctor in any room, it's not me. Who is it, Lauren? It's you. And giving you the tools so that you can live healthy for as long as you would like, or as long as God will allow you to. Yes. Because every day is a gift. Now, any questions? No? Good. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. And sorry, Lauren. Hopefully you learned something new. And my challenge to you is education without implementation leads to depression. So pick one thing and do it. That's it. Yeah. Yes.
Goes to chiropractic care, I can tell you, it keeps me glued to that.
Yeah. Because how long have you been getting adjusted, Lauren? Oh, you've 12 years?
12 or 13.
12 or 13. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When
Yeah.
you say get adjusted, what do you mean exactly?
Oh, so have you ever been to a chiropractor?
I have not. I went to a non-surgical orthopedic.
Okay. Yeah.
It's recommended mat Pilates class, which does a lot of the stuff you do.
Yes.
But what does it mean you say get adjusted?
So it depends on where you go. I mean, typically,